I laughed when she said it. That was my first mistake, laughing. Because she thought I was nervous, and she took that as weakness, and everything that came after was built on that misunderstanding. Let me back up. My name is not important. What's important is that I am 67 years old. I have owned my home for 31 years, and for 6 of those years I shared it with my son and his wife. 6 years. I want you to hold that number in your mind while I tell you this story, because by the end you're going to need it. My son. I'll call him my son because that's what he is, and that's all that matters here. Came to me in the spring of 2017. He was 34. His wife Leanne was 31. They'd been married 2 years, and they were, as he put it, between situations. His lease was up. Her hours had been cut at the hospital, where she worked in billing. They needed somewhere to land, just for a little while, just to get their feet under them. I said yes. Of course I said yes. He's my child. I live in a 3-bedroom ranch house outside of Columbus, Ohio. Nothing fancy, beige siding, a driveway that needs resurfacing every other year, a backyard I've kept up since my husband passed in 2012. My husband left me the house outright. No mortgage. That part matters too. Remember it. When my son and Leanne moved in, I gave them the 2 back bedrooms, one to sleep in, one they said they'd use as an office. I kept my room at the front of the house, near the kitchen. It was fine. I told myself it was fine. It mostly was for the first year. Leanne was polite enough in those early months. She said please and thank you. She offered to help with groceries once in a while. Though she rarely followed through, my son worked in logistics, long hours, and I think he was grateful I was there. Someone familiar in a life that had gotten complicated. We'd watch the news together some evenings before Leanne came home. Those were good nights. Then something shifted. I couldn't tell you exactly when. It wasn't a door slamming or a single bad word. It was slower than that. Like water finding its way under a baseboard. Quiet and patient, and doing damage you don't see until it's already done. Leanne started making comments about the television. I like to watch my programs in the evening, the news, then sometimes a cooking show, then one of those home renovation things I've always enjoyed. She started sighing when she walked through the living room. Then the sighing became remarks. You watch the same shows every night, don't you? Not a question. A statement, like she was observing some kind of defect. I let it go. I am not someone who looks for conflict. My mother raised me to keep the peace, and I spent most of my life doing exactly that, for better and for worse. But then she started in on the kitchen. She rearranged my cabinets. That was the first thing. I came downstairs one Saturday morning and my mugs were in a different cupboard. My spices had been moved to the drawer beside the stove, and my mixing bowls, the ones my mother gave me, the green ceramic ones I've had since 1987, were on the bottom shelf instead of the top. When I asked about it, she said, I just reorganized a little. It makes more sense this way. I stood there in my own kitchen and I didn't say a word. She started referring to the house as our place. Not to me, to other people. I overheard her on the phone once telling someone, yeah, we have a nice setup. It's our place, plenty of room. I was standing 6 feet away watering the plant by the window. She didn't even lower her voice. I brought it up with my son one afternoon when Leanne was at work. I sat him down at the kitchen table, my kitchen table, and I told him quietly and without drama that I needed him to hear me, that his wife's behavior was making me uncomfortable in my own home, that I had been patient, but patience has a flaw. He nodded. He said he understood. He said he'd talked to her. Things got slightly better for about 3 weeks. Then they returned to exactly what they had been, and then they got worse. By 2020, they were still there. 3 years had become 4, and 4 was becoming 5. My son had a new position by then, better money, he said. Things were looking up, but they didn't move. Every time I raised it gently, have you two thought about looking at apartments, or there's a nice new complex over on Morse Road. There was always a reason. Too expensive. bad timing, waiting to see what the market does. I stopped raising it after a while. I don't know why. I think I was tired. Leanne by that point had stopped pretending entirely. She left dishes in the sink and expected me to wash them. She turned the thermostat down to 68 in winter and up to 78 in summer without asking. She once told me, within earshot of my neighbour Peg, that I didn't really use the back porch anyway, as if that were a reason she should be able to fill it with her potted plants and her outdoor furniture and her string lights, so that it no longer looked anything like the porch I'd sat on with my husband every evening for 20 years. I told myself it was temporary. Every single year I told myself it was temporary. Then the summer of 2022 arrived. My son called me from work on a Thursday afternoon in August. His voice sounded strange, flattened and high at the same time, like he was trying not to make noise, but couldn't keep it inside. He said, "Mum, you need to come home." I was at the pharmacy. I left my prescription at the counter and drove home. Leanne was sitting at my kitchen table when I walked in. She had her phone face up in front of her, and she was staring at the screen like she was afraid to look away. My son was standing by the refrigerator. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then my son said, "We won." I didn't understand at first. I said, "Won what?" He showed me his phone, the Ohio lottery, a Powerball jackpot. The numbers were there in black and white, and they matched every single one of them the ticket he was holding in his hand. $41 million, that was the lump sum after the jackpot split. 41 million before taxes. I sat down. My legs made that decision for me. My son hugged me. He was shaking. I could feel it through his shirt, this trembling he couldn't stop, like a dog that's been running. I held on to him and I thought, whatever happens now, this is still my child. That thought lasted about 40 minutes. Leanne by then had recovered herself. She was on the phone with someone, her sister I think, or maybe her mother, and her voice had changed completely. She was laughing and talking fast and using words like investment and financial advisor and fresh start. I sat at my kitchen table and listened to her talk about a fresh start, and something in my chest went very still and very cold. After she hung up, she sat back down across from me. My son was in the other room. It was just the two of us. She put her hands flat on the table. She looked at me the way someone looks at a piece of furniture they've decided to get rid of. She said, "We're going to need to talk about the living situation." I said, "All right." She said, "We want to buy a house, something nice, the kind of place we actually want to live in." She paused. "This place is yours, obviously. We'll be getting our own place." I thought, finally. I thought 6 years and it's finally done. I almost felt relief. Then she said, "But we're going to need some time to find the right property. The market's complicated right now, so we'll stay here through the transition." I said, "How long of a transition?" She smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "That depends. But honestly, at this point, wouldn't it make more sense for you to think about a smaller place, a senior apartment, something easier to manage?" I looked at her. I said, "This is my house." She said, "I know that. I'm just saying with us potentially buying something larger and you here alone, it might be a good opportunity for you to think about next steps. A lot of women your age find it's actually a relief to downsize." She said women your age the way someone says it when they mean something else entirely. I said very calmly, "I'm not planning to go anywhere." She leaned forward. She said, "That's sweet. But realistically, this house is going to feel very empty once we leave. And the upkeep, I mean, you've been managing it, but you're not going to be able to keep up with it forever. We'd be doing you a favor, helping you find something more suitable before you actually need to." I said, "I keep this house just fine." She said, "Of course you do." Another smile. "Just think about it." That night I sat in my bedroom with the door closed, and I did think about it. I thought about it for a long time, and then I stopped thinking about her and started thinking about myself, which I probably should have done years earlier. The next morning, I called my neighbour Peg. Peg is 72 and sharp as a tack, and her son-in-law is a real estate attorney. She'd mentioned him a dozen times over the years, so I knew exactly who I was going to call next. Peg gave me his number without any questions. She'd just said, "Good, it's time." His name was Alan. I called him from my car in the driveway because I didn't want to be overheard inside. He was thorough and patient, and he didn't talk to me like I was old. He asked me to send him a copy of the deed to the house, which I had filed in a fireproof box in my closet. My husband had been careful that way, and I had continued to be careful after he was gone. Alan called me back the following day. He said, "The deed is clear. Your name, sole ownership. No co-signers, no liens, nothing. That house is yours in every legal sense." I said, "I know it is." He said, "Then no one can remove you from it. Not without a court order, and a court isn't going to issue one against a homeowner in good standing. What they can do is leave. What they cannot do is make you leave." I thanked him. I sat with that for a moment, and then I asked him one more question, the one that had been sitting in the back of my mind since the day before. I said, "If they bought a lottery ticket while living in my home, does that affect anything? The winnings?" He said, "Not if the ticket was purchased with their own money and is in their name. Why?" I said, "I'm just thinking through all the angles." He said, "Smart. Now here is where I need to stop and tell you something, because this is the part that changes the whole story. This is the part I haven't told many people. 2 weeks before my son called me from work on that August afternoon, I had gone to the Gas and Go on Sunbury Road to pick up a few things. Milk, a birthday card from my friend Ottoline, a scratch-off that I bought out of habit, because that's something my husband and I used to do. And while I was at the counter, the clerk asked if I wanted to add a Powerball ticket to my order. There was a promotion. Buy a soda, get a discounted ticket. I'd bought a soda. I said yes. The ticket was in my name. It was paid for with my debit card. I had the receipt. When I got home, I tucked the ticket into my desk drawer. The small one in the roll-up desk in the hallway that I've had since my mother-in-law passed it down to me, and I forgot about it entirely. Because I always forget. I buy one every few months, and I forget to check, and I eventually throw them out. On the night my son showed me his ticket, I didn't make the connection. Not right away. But the next afternoon, when Leanne made her little speech about senior apartments, something tugged at my memory, and that evening after dinner, I went to the roll-up desk. The ticket was still there. I bought it 2 Saturdays before the drawing. I sat down at my computer and I looked up the winning numbers. I held the ticket with both hands. My hands were steady, which surprised me. Every number matched. I sat there for a very long time. I could hear Leanne in the other room watching something on her laptop, and my son's voice occasionally, and the ordinary sounds of the house settling around me. I sat there and I held that ticket, and I understood completely what had happened. We had both bought winning tickets. There had been multiple jackpot winners that drawing. It had been a split jackpot. My son had won $41 million, and so it turned out, had I. I did not tell them that night. I called Alan. He said, "Are you certain?" I said, "I have the receipt, the ticket, and 6 screenshots of the lottery website." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do not tell anyone, not yet. I'm going to make some calls." What followed was 2 weeks of the quietest, most focused time of my life. Alan verified the ticket. We worked with a lottery claim attorney who specialized in exactly this kind of situation. I set up a trust. Alan insisted, and he was right. And I filed the claim through the trust, which is a standard thing that lottery winners do in Ohio to protect their privacy. During those 2 weeks, Leanne made 3 separate comments about the senior apartment situation. once at dinner, once when her sister visited, once when he was on the phone and didn't think I could hear. Each time I smiled and said nothing. Each time she took my silence as agreement. My son, to his credit, was gentler about it. He came to me once, privately, and said he hoped I knew they weren't trying to push me out. He said they just wanted to find their own place, build their own life. I said I understood completely. He looked relieved. I didn't tell him about the ticket, not yet. I needed everything in place first. The day I got the call from the Lottery Commission confirming my claim, I was standing in my kitchen making coffee. The woman on the phone was very professional and very calm, and she confirmed that my trust was the verified claimant for a jackpot prize of $41 million, with a lump sum option of approximately $28 million before federal taxes, which in Ohio comes to somewhere in the range of $19 million after all is said and done. I thanked her. I poured my coffee. I sat down at my kitchen table and I looked out the window at my backyard, at the garden I've kept for 30 years, at the bird feeder my husband put up the summer before he got sick, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 6 years. I felt settled, like someone had pressed their hand flat against a table that had been rocking for years, and everything went still. That evening, I asked my son and Leanne to sit down with me. They came to the living room, both of them, and sat together on the couch across from my chair. Leanne had her phone in her hand, which is where it always was. My son looked like he was bracing for something, though I don't think he knew what. I said, I want to talk about the living situation. Leanne straightened up immediately. She said, of course, we've been meaning to. I said, let me finish. She closed her mouth. I said, this is my house. The deed is in my name, has been for 31 years, and will remain so. I am not going anywhere. I am not moving to a senior apartment or a smaller place or anywhere else. I am 67 years old, and I am in good health, and this is my home. Leanne said, we know that. We were just suggesting. I said, I'm not finished. She looked at my son. He looked at me. I reached into my cardigan pocket. I'd kept the ticket there in a protective sleeve since the claim was finalized. I set it on the coffee table between us. I said, 2 weeks before your drawing, I bought a Powerball ticket at the Gas and Go on Sunbury Road. I have the receipt. This is that ticket. I paused. It's a winner. For a moment, no one spoke. My son said, Mom. I said, a split jackpot. You're aware there were multiple winners. I was one of them. The claim has already been filed and confirmed through a trust which is standard. Everything is done. Leanne stared at the ticket. Her face has gone a complicated colour, somewhere between pale and something else I don't have a word for. She said, that's you can't. I said I can, and I did. You're welcome to verify it. Alan is available if you have legal questions. My son was very quiet. Then he said, you've known for 2 weeks. I said, yes. He said, why didn't you tell us? I said, because I needed to make sure everything was in order first, and because I wanted to understand what was happening in this house before I said a word. He sat with that. I watched him work through it, all of it, what it meant, what the last 2 weeks had been, what the last 6 years had been. Leanne found her voice. She said, so now what? You're going to what? Keep it all? I said, it's my ticket. It's my money. She said, you could help your son after everything. I said, my son has $41 million. He'll be fine. I looked at him when I said it. He didn't disagree. She said, this is unbelievable. I said, what I find unbelievable, Leanne, is that you sat at my kitchen table and told me to go find a senior apartment in my house that you've lived in for free for 6 years. The room was very quiet. My son looked at his wife, then at me, then down at his hands. I said, I think it's time for you both to find your own place. You have the means now. I'd like this to happen within 60 days. They moved out in 43. My son and I have spoken since. It's careful and it's not what it was, and I won't pretend otherwise. He chose her, and I understand that, even when it hurts, she has not reached out. I didn't expect her to. The house is quiet in the evenings now, but it's a different kind of quiet than it used to be. It's mine again. I refilled the bird feeder. I put my green mixing bowls back on the top shelf. I still make my coffee in the same mug every morning, the one with the chip in the handle that I've never thrown away because my husband used it every day for 15 years. I sat on my back porch last week in the evening when the light was going golden across the yard, and I thought about what Leanne had said. Women your age. Like age was a verdict. Like 67 was a closing door. I thought about $19 million sitting in a trust with my name on it. Then I went inside because it was time for the news, and that porch has always been mine. I keep thinking about that moment at the roll-up desk, the ticket in my hands, the numbers on the screen, the sound of Leanne's voice coming from the other room, easy and unbothered, the way someone sounds when they believe they've already won. There's a version of this story where I never check that drawer, where the ticket sits there until I throw it out with the old grocery receipts and the expired coupons, the way I'd done a dozen times before. And if that had happened, I wonder sometimes what would have become of me, whether I'd have let myself be slowly, politely relocated to something smaller, something more suitable, somewhere women my age aren't in anyone's way. What I know now is this: the outcome wasn't luck, not entirely. Luck put the ticket in my hand, but what I did with it, the 2 quiet weeks, the calls to Alan, the patience, the decision not to speak until everything was certain, that came from something I had to build deliberately over a long life, and it didn't come easy. I think about the years I spent keeping the peace in that house, the rearranged cabinets I didn't push back on, the sighing I absorbed, the thermostat I didn't touch. For a long time I told myself that was kindness, and some of it was, but some of it was also the habit of making myself small so that other people stayed comfortable. That's not kindness. That's a slow erosion, and it happens to a lot of women, and we call it patience because that sounds better. What changed, what had to change, was that I finally treated myself as someone worth defending, not aggressively, not with anger, though I had plenty I could have reached for, but clearly, with documentation, with counsel, with a plan. I didn't walk into that living room on the night I showed them the ticket until I was certain of every fact. That certainty wasn't arrogance. It was the result of taking my own situation seriously enough to prepare. Leanne was not a stupid person. She was a person who had correctly assessed that I would not fight back, and she had built her entire approach on that assessment. What she missed, what people like her often miss, is that the ones who don't raise their voices are not always the ones without resources. Sometimes they're the ones who understand that timing is everything. My son is a different kind of grief. I don't have a tidy resolution there, and I won't pretend I do. He's my child. He will always be my child. But I've learned at 67 that loving someone is not the same as absorbing whatever they allow to happen to you. He made choices, and I made mine, and we are both living with them now. The bird feeder is full. The green bowls are back on the top shelf. I sit on my porch in the evenings, and I watch the light go across the yard, and I think about what it means to know your own worth, not in the way of a motivational poster, but in the real and practical way. The way that means keeping your receipts, knowing your lawyer's number, and refusing to be talked out of what is plainly, legally, entirely yours. That's what I want to leave with anyone who watched this and recognize something of themselves in it. Not that things will always work out the way mine did, they won't, always. But that you are allowed to know your own name on your own deed. You are allowed to take 2 weeks and say nothing while you make sure of the facts. You are allowed to be the one who walks in prepared. I was not lucky. I was ready. There's a difference, and it took me most of my life to learn it.